Hey, so good morning. So all of Gathering Point, it really just kind of started out as an idea. It started out as an idea, and I mean, you look around now and there's people walking around with cameras and there's iPads all over the place and there's amazing volunteers and staff and all this, but it really just kind of started off as an idea, like a rudimentary idea. And some people around this community began to dream and they began to wonder, what if a place existed in our community where people could ask questions about faith, even if they weren't really interested in faith. Where you didn't have to believe before you could belong, where you could kind of check things out, because up until that point, only church people went to church. Does that make sense to you? Do you know like church people is? I mean, only church people. And so if you weren't like a church person, you probably didn't go to church and to begin to go. But what if we could create an environment where people who didn't like church or didn't feel like they were welcome to church could go to a church and ask questions about faith? Because up until that point in our community, it was only like church was for church people. And do you know what church people look like? They look like this. Yeah, and that was sort of the kind of...
Stop. That's not kind. Gosh,
Well, it's true, though.
Stop. I put myself out there, okay? I told a legitimate true story, and now you're going to show a picture of my family? That's me. Where did you get that? That's me.
Well, you got on and on about your Charger and your police lights.
No, it was a Cougar. Get it right.
Yeah.
Fine. Next. I'm preaching now. Next. Yeah. Joke's on you, Paul. Nice curls.
But it's true. That's who went to church. My family and Matt's family. And many of you looked at that and were like, man, I ain't going to hang out with those people. Right? It was true. And so they began this idea, because church had really only been for church people. And so this idea began, and it was called a seed. And they began to call it a seed of faith. And people began to give sacrificially, and they began to pray. And then they bought land right here out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, like nowhere, like no interstate exit, no neighborhoods over here, no Diamond Point, none of this. I mean, like nowhere. And the critics all thought, this is crazy. But a group of people said, what if we're intentional? What if we're intentional? What if we began to design and gave people this opportunity to explore faith, even if they weren't interested in faith or believed in faith or wanted to hang out with church people? And so they gave and they gave and they served and they served, and they built this place called the North Campus, which was actually a sister church of College Church. And at that point, the only difference between this and College Church was you didn't have to wear a suit out here. But then College Church kind of continued on their mission and vision, which is fine, and that's good. And this began to grow, and it began to take on its own life and its own mission and vision. And 7 years ago, Gathering Point, this place was launched and was started. And it had one real core belief, and that is simply this: church shouldn't be complicated for people who want to connect with God. So from day one, they knew that it just needed to be simple. It just had to be simple, because it seems like church, one of the barriers for churches is like it's just so complicated. And everybody kind of goes and does their thing, and you just kind of go. And so oftentimes we'll have people that'll visit or something from another church, and they'll be like, hey, do you guys have this? And we're like, no. And they're like, well, you guys should do that. Well, we would, but you left that place that had that, so why would we bring it here, right? It's not that it's wrong, it's just we're not called to do that. God hadn't called us to do those things. And so we kind of began to look at it differently and said, you know what? We believe God has given us a responsibility to the next generation of church, whatever that may look like. We have a responsibility to that. And so we decided we're going to be committed not to doing a bunch of programs. And I know some of you are like, do you guys have this? And we're like, no, but you should. We know, but we don't. And here's why: because we became committed to invest in the next generation, your kids, your grandkids, your children's children, to help them so that they could begin to win, not only in the community and at school or at the dance studio or at the Little League team, whatever it was, and not helping them like win games or win ribbons or performances, but to help them win at life. And there's a number that's thrown around our county all the right now. Everybody's always watching. People are checking websites every day, whether or not we're on the 8% line, right? And usually that means like our infection rate in the county these days. But I was looking, and there's a whole nother 8% number that I'm more interested than the infection number, even though I'm, whatever, that's fine. But 8% of our county is under the age of 5. That means there's over 9,000 kids that are nursery to pre-K, not to mention the tens of thousands who are in elementary school and high school in our county. And apart from the rest of the state, our county skews young. And we have a responsibility, and many adults think that our youth and they're the problem. We think that they're the solution, which means we need to equip them, we need to mentor them, we need to coach them, we need to lead them, we need to parent them, we need to grandparent them well, extremely well, because when we help the next generation win, we all win. Newsflash, they will be leading sooner than probably you would like, right? And by winning, we don't mean like help them have a better standard of living than we did. We said years ago that we want to have a standard for living. We don't want to give our kids a standard of living. We want to give them a standard for living. And so how do we not make the lives easier for the generation that's coming behind them, but how do we improve the generation's standard of living? How do we provide them, helping them have a model for living, which is to say, here at Gathering Point, how do we help them define the way that they live based off of the model that Jesus began to live, which means the church needs to give them a standard for living, which is modeled on the life of Jesus. And this is what we've noticed, and this isn't like newsflash for you. You already know this. Life is more complicated than it's ever been before. It's more uncertain than it's ever been before. And here's what this means. We need to be even more strategic and even more intentional and even more available to lead the next generation. And so we want to make sure that we have a strategy so that we just don't live life reactionary. I mean, I think if we all raised our hand, how many of you have reacted to something in the last year? Or gotten like hyper opinionated about something in the last year? Reactions and hyper opinions aren't strategies, they're reactions. And so many people are always wondering, what do we do about these days and the times that we're living in? So today I want to share with you briefly about a book that was written a long time ago called First Chronicles, and it's really like the life of Israel, and it kind of chronicles the life of the nation of Israel's history when they were divided up into tribes, and there's some significant events that take place. And early on in Israel, I mean, it really wasn't a nation, it was more like 12 tribes, and there was a man named David who was crowned king, and that sort of crystallized some pieces. And as we go through this book of Chronicles, there's this one tribe that's sort of introduced to us, and it's this tribe of Issachar, okay? Issachar. You don't have to remember that. There won't be a test or quiz after it, all right? I know some of you are new to school right now. Just tap the brakes a little bit. You'll be fine. First Chronicles chapter 12, verse 32 says this: from the tribe of Issachar, there were 200 leaders of the tribe with their relatives, so everybody was included, and all of these men, all the women, all the people that were there they understood the signs of the times. Isn't that the trick? They understood the signs of the times, and they knew what the best course for Israel to take. And really, this is what we're attempting to do, and it's so hard, it's so challenging, because we are uncertain about the times that we're living in, and we wonder, how we're going to do this. So how do we help people live well? How do we help the next generation live well? How do we help them live effectively? And how do we pass on a standard for living? How do we do that? Because the problem that you face and the problem that I face is it's virtually impossible to understand the times that we're living in. I mean, think about it. Every day it changes. Masks, vaccines, and those are just two of the things that create uncertainty in the days that we have. And this is what I see people doing all over our community. Some people are sitting back and hoping for the best. That's not a strategy, and honestly, that probably would be disastrous. To wait for this to blow over before we got about mission and vision here at Gathering Point would take longer than we thought. I mean, who thought this would be like 2 weeks and then it'd be like, okay, and then we're going, right? Remember that? To run and to hide is worse. That's not a strategy. So we need to take whatever actions necessary to make sure that we have a legacy in place for our children and our grandkids. And that doesn't mean that we blame culture. Dear Lord, who's sick of that? My gracious. Doesn't mean we pick a fight or go to war with culture or boycott or rant or rave or choose ranks or be paralyzed by fear. It doesn't mean that you put your kids in a secure little Christian bubble until they're 30, right? And then send them out with blow-ups on their arms or something like that to begin to take off. It means we learn the culture. It means we become students of the world that they're living in. And we become missionaries, ready to equip them to live well and to become the best versions of themselves, to become the people that Jesus has called them to be in the world that they're living into. Now, let me just give you a side note. Oftentimes this doesn't work because you can't put in your kids what's not in you. So our big question that we've kind of been wrestling with here and that we always want to come back to is, are we leaving something that's worth giving? Right? Are we leaving something worth leaving behind to the generation that's followed us? And so we set out to create a church that had this strategy. I mean, it's a huge calling, huge responsibility, and some may think it's too simple because we literally said, here's what we want people to do. We want people to serve, we want people to give, we want people to join a group, we want people to be baptized, and then invite your friends. And for years, almost like a half a generation now, we have said that it's more important for you to get your heart right than to like start with your behavior. Because back when Matt and I grew up, it was more important that you looked right and that your behavior was right, but your heart could be rotten as long as you looked right and smiled, right? And we said, no, I think that's backwards. I think let's focus on getting our heart right. Let's monitor our heart. And then our behavior will take care of itself. But let's deal with the issues and the junk that's taking place on in. And we started with the simple premise. We don't want to make it difficult for people to come to God who are interested in God. And so if you're a guest with us or if you're checking us out online, and I know a lot of you do, and you're invited to be on this journey. There is like no prerequisite for this journey to be on with us here at Gathering Point. And if this is your first Sunday or if this is your first time clicking with us, great. You're in, you're on board because this is something much bigger than we can accomplish on your own or that you can accomplish on your own. And so we set off to do this. And then guess what? The pandemic hit. I don't know if you knew that or not. I want to be the first to tell you. It's kind of a big deal, right? And it seemed like, I don't know about your life, but in my life, it seemed like once the pandemic hit, we all became more concerned with survival than strategy. I know I got caught up into that. And it seemed like rather than mission and vision and strategy, it was more about survival. And that does something to us. And let me just tell you, once you get into a pandemic, and this is my first pandemic, so I'm still new to this thing, but I've noticed in myself, pandemics have a thing of making us extremely selfish, right? Maybe it's just me. Pandemics have made me selfish because in a pandemic, I only think about what? Or whom, rather? Me. And I didn't realize that at first, but I've come to realize that pandemics, and now I'll know for future pandemics, so I'll be better prepared, but pandemics make us selfish. And what about my rights? What about my preferences? What about what I want? And I'm not critiquing anybody. I'm just stating the facts of my own life, right? And it's true for me, but surviving is not a long-term strategy, is it? It's just not. Well, I think at this point we can pause and say, I think we've figured out how to survive, haven't we? We figured out how to survive. Are we thriving? Probably not, but we figured out how to survive. And so here's what we probably need, a recovery plan. Because here's what I know about you and here's what I know about me is that we probably didn't have a good strategy for living before the pandemic. And the pandemic only heightened that, didn't it? Everything got worse in the pandemic, right? Your relationships got worse, your debt got worse. And for most people, your faith was just put on a shelf. And you're like, we'll see. So let me state the obvious here. I'm not the CDC. I don't work for the CDC. I don't know how the next clicks of this pandemic or whatever are going to roll out. But here's what I know. We have to get back to living strategically, living on mission, being for others, not just saying, what about me and what are my rights and what do I want, all this. Not just what do I want. Because not too many years ago, the place that you're sitting right now, the place that I'm standing was dirt. It was dirt. Well, I mean, there probably was beans or corn on it, whatever it was, but the only place that you would have gotten to where you were sitting right at this very moment would have been via tractor, okay? But something happened. Some people started praying about you and your family. And that's so crazy because some of you hadn't even been born yet. Isn't that crazy? I mean, it's so weird to think about. In fact, underneath this carpet, there are prayers that have been written in Sharpies years and years ago about you or people just like you. And which is so crazy because some of you laughed about the idea of ever even visiting church or going to church. And there were people in this community that were praying for you because some of you thought church was only a place for weddings and funerals, right? And that was the only reason you even went to one to begin with. Because if you went to a church, that was like admitting you were bad or a bad person. But they prayed for you. And the reason that they prayed for you is because they read a verse in Acts about the new church, the church that Jesus started. And the first century church wrote this. And they said, it is my judgment. Because they were all trying to figure out, like, is church for church people, like that look like Matt and my family? Is church for church people or is church, who is church for? And this is what they concluded. In my judgment, therefore, this was an official church statement. We should not make it difficult for the Gentiles. Gentiles were people who were not a part of the temple crowd. They were not a part of the religious crowd. They were Gentiles. And we should not make it difficult for Gentiles who are wanting to turn to God. Well, they should have to do this, or they shouldn't do this. They should do that. And they said, whoa, let's not make it difficult. Let's just not make it difficult. And so one of the loudest people in the group during this season of the early church, his name was Peter, and Peter said, he said this before this, they wrote this down. Years earlier, they were up and they were traveling and they were asking questions because everybody's still trying to figure out if Jesus is the Messiah or not, and are you the one, or is there somebody else that's coming, and how does all this work? And they go, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, Jesus. And Peter, he was one of the most outspoken people in the group. He says, I thought this is different than what my mom and dad said the Messiah would be. This is different than what my grandparents said it would be. And they said all along, we were supposed to come and wait for this one who is going to come and restore the world. And wouldn't we love to have someone come and restore the world right now? I mean, wouldn't that be awesome? That's exactly what they were waiting on in this time of the world when the Bible was written. They were waiting on a Messiah to come and restore the world. And Jesus came, and Peter came to this conclusion, and he didn't come to it all by himself. He says, look, you're the Son of God, aren't you? Jesus, you're the Son of God. Like, you're the actual Son of God. And in Jesus' response, what Jesus does in his response is he predicts Gathering Point. He predicts Gathering Point Church. Jesus predicted the church that you grow up in, the church I grew up in, the church that Matt grew up in down in southern Indiana. He predicted the church that you grew up in. Jesus predicted the church that impacted your grandparents. He predicted the church that ultimately impacted you. And Jesus predicted the church right out here in the northwest corner of Kankakee County this morning, because this is what Jesus said to Peter. Jesus replied in Matthew chapter 16, verse 17, Jesus replied, hey, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this wasn't revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter. And on this rock, where they were located in Caesarea Philippi, I will build my church right in the middle of where everyone is worshiping other gods, where people are doing pagan worship, where people are doing all kinds of crazy things as it pertains to sexual ethic and all these kinds of things that were taking place in those moments. He says, right here in this place where nobody else wants to be and where nobody likes church people, I'm going to build my church, and the gates of Hades, the gates of hell, will not overcome it. And there's lots of really cool nuanced things that are taking place in this particular passage of Scripture, and there's lots of different things, but the word that's used in there about I will build my church, the word church is actually this word called ecclesia. And the ecclesia does not mean building. He does not say, and on this rock, this looks like we're not dealing with a civil engineer here where he goes, and on this rock, we're going to build, and I got blueprints, we're going to build this church, and it's going to have gables, and it's going to have flying buttresses, and we're going to have all of this crazy stuff on here, and there'll be crosses. Oh, it's going to be awesome. No, it was not. The word ecclesia does not mean building, right? The word ecclesia, because as soon as we hear the word church, we think go to building. But that's not at all what Jesus meant. He says, I'm going to build my ecclesia. And ecclesia means gathering, a gathering of people, which is where we got our name. It's a point. It's the place. It's the place where we gather to do something. And what we're doing is becoming the people that Jesus called us to do. And so Peter, on his statement, Jesus looks at him and goes, on your statement that you just made, he goes, Peter, bingo, you got it. You nailed it. Right upon this place, there's going to be something brand new that happens. And while everyone is thinking building, I'm thinking gathering. A group of people that will be unleashed in the world to do something new in the world. And ultimately, Jesus would start a revolution that would take over a world, a revolution that would take over a world that was not interested at all in what Jesus and his little band of guys were doing. They could care less. A world who could have given a small rip about this little group of disciples that were up in the region of Galilee. But he starts with this little group who's defined by love and hope and compassion and generosity and care. And Jesus had no interest in starting a religion. In fact, Jesus kind of came to shut down religion. He was like, it's so annoying. And you were like, yeah, I know, no kidding, right? Jesus wasn't interested in starting a church the way that we think about church. He wanted a gathering of people that would become a movement that one day would start a revolution defined by his love, and the way it would redefine the way that we viewed ourselves and the way that we viewed others, our neighbors, and our world. And one day, and they didn't know this at the point, but at one day the Roman Empire would be nothing more than a tourist trap. People would just come, take pictures next to the place. It'd be a tourist attraction. The Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the Temple Mount would one day be a temple. It'd be a mount minus the temple. It's just a mount now. It's a Wailing Wall, but there's no temple on it. And Jesus is like, what I'm about ready to start is going to outlast the Roman Empire, and it's going to outlast the temple period and all these kind of things. And what I'm going to unleash on the world is a brand new type of gathering, a brand new type of movement of Jesus. And Jesus says, look, I've come to build my church, my gathering, and this movement, and not even death is going to stop this. And I'm going to die, and it won't matter because I'm going to go on. The movement isn't defined by my life, but it'll actually be in my death that this thing really gets going. And so the church is truly the most amazing thing that the world has known, because over 2,000 years ago, Jesus predicted it. And here's what I'm stuck with this. I know it's been a tough season for all of us, but it's time for the movement of Jesus to start moving again. We've got to start moving again around this central idea that God came and his son is living. And I'm not making this up, right? Because in the world, in different time zones this morning, in different languages, with different music styles, all around the world right now, all different kinds of buildings, different kinds of chairs, different kinds of, mask mandates, no mask mandates, all this kind of stuff, all over the world this morning. It's meeting all over the globe, and we all have one thing in common. Even though the diversity is beautiful, we have one thing in common, and this is really the only thing that we have in common, and that is we believe that Jesus is Lord and is the Son of the living God. And he doesn't give us a standard of living, he raises our standard for living. And so Jesus 2,000 years ago predicted, why we are gathering here today. He predicted you, he predicted me, he predicted GatheringPoint Church, and the church is a really, really big deal. And this is why I believe that outside of your family, the local church is the greatest investment of time, energy, and effort that you can make in your life, because it will outlive you, it will outlast you, and it will out-impact you. And later this month, we're going to continue on and Be Rich. And if you're new here, if you're checking us out today online, Be Rich is something you're not going to want to miss, is because it's really an opportunity for us to invest in the community in ways with just no strings attached generosity. And it's just a blast. It's so much fun, and that's coming up. But it's not necessarily what we do that's an impact. It's who we are. That's why it's a big deal. And this is why you should always want to figure out how to love and serve and be a part of the local church and to give to the local church, to Gathering Point. Because years ago, in Kankakee County, a group of people didn't plan on starting a church. In fact, like some of the stuff they did, they started with like cupcakes and playing volleyball with Gathering Point kids. They didn't say, hey, let's start a church. No, it was just, hey, let's love on some kids with some cupcakes, and let's see if we can do that. And then over a few period of years, that became an extension of the Church of Jesus Christ that was started over 2,000 years ago. But here we are. And every one of your stories is about the life change of Jesus working in and through you. And because of your efforts and your investment and your commitment to Jesus and this extended family that we call Gathering Point Church is inspiring people to live differently in our community and go to school different and go to work different, all over that. And it's not just the people in this room. I don't know if you knew this, but every week there's over 500 that gather with us online and join in for whatever reason from all over the place. And those of you who are online, if you're sitting in your living room or on your phone, or hopefully you're not driving, right? But if you are, please pull over, right? Before somebody pulls you over, like Matt told us about earlier. You're not watching alone either. You're not watching alone either. You're a part of something that's much bigger than you. And you need to know that while you're watching where you are today, the church Jesus protected isn't a building. It's a movement. It's a gathering. And you're a part of that gathering too. And so there's never been a better time to be a part of the movement of Jesus. And I know you have excuses, and I know about your schedule, and I know that there's a pandemic, and I know that there's masks, and I know that there's this and there's that, and there's on and 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 on. But that has never stopped the movement of Jesus Christ from becoming more and more like Jesus each and every day. And in my opinion, the movement needs to start moving again. And so after today's service, we're going to offer you an opportunity to join Starting Point. And if you're online, we want you to click and follow on the website to begin a part of that. But if you don't believe me that even in a pandemic that this work, this movement of Jesus can continue to move, then I want you to just watch this one story, and I want you to meet Jim and Angie.
Angie and I really got married in September. We blended our families, quite a big family. We have 5 kids at home. It's a handful, and we got married, and like I said, it was just trying to blend our family was a challenge, and for me, my background was I really kind of took a step back from church for quite some time, and for me it was important, with us being newlyweds and blending our families, it was important for me that we made church a priority once again in our lives. And I think that honestly, we watched quite a few online services, and we really enjoyed Pastor Paul and the messages that were being told to us. And then we decided to take that step further, and we reached out. And it was really a no-brainer when we walked into the church, how welcome we felt. I mean, it was just overwhelming. I mean, I haven't experienced that feeling of welcomeness from people in the community till we walked in here, and it was just amazing. And then the music was amazing, the messages were amazing.
And so we just kept coming, and we got our kids involved and plugged into, like he said, we have kids from 18 to 10, and so 9. So we got them plugged into the high school group. We got our middle schools plugged into the Wednesday night group, and then our little ones are in GP Kids. And each one of them are making connections. Each one of them are making friendships. Each one are growing in their faith. And so it was just a really good fit for our family.
Thanks, Jim and Angie, and welcome. Welcome. So today, if you are not plugged in, or if you're not connected, or if you're not sure what your next step is, we're starting something new today, and it's called Starting Point. There's no prerequisite. And if you've been here for 5 years or if you've been here for like a minute, right? This is your opportunity to join. And if you're joining us online, we want you to go ahead and click to take your next step online. But this fall, here's what we think. The movement of Jesus needs to start moving again. We need to turn the focus off of ourselves and surviving. That doesn't mean that we need to stop being responsible. I'm going to put my mask back on in about 2 seconds, right, and begin to go off the platform and begin to circulate around. But the movement needs to begin to move. Can I pray with you this morning? Father, this morning we are glad and grateful to be called your people, and we just have our moment in history. 2,000 years ago, there were people that were gathered in your name, and they were up against the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire had zero sympathy for faith, and here we are meeting in a place that used to, produce corn and beans. But God, this is our world, and this is our community, and we want you to move through us to make an impact in our community, in our world, not to give our community a better standard of living, but to help them to have a standard for living, a strategy, so that we just don't live reactionary and hyper-opinionated to the times that we're living in, that we can respond with grace and mercy and love, because that's the way you responded to us and with us, and you want to respond through us. So thanks for this place out in the northwest corner of Kankakee County called GatheringPoint. We want to be responsible with it. We love you, Jesus. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Amen. We'll continue next week, and then we're going to roll into Be Rich. We're so glad you've joined us here today, in person and online, and we'll see you next week. You're dismissed.
Thanks so much for joining us today. If you love the content you heard and you'd like to know when the new content becomes available, scroll down and like and subscribe to our channel. Again, thanks so much for being here today, and we can't wait to see you next week.